I was 17 when my mother said it out loud. Not during a fight. Not in a moment of anger. Not when we were alone. We were sitting together as a family. The room was quiet. People were listening. She didn't lower her voice. He didn't hesitate. She didn't even look nervous. She looked calm. Certain. Then she said it. You were a mistake. Everyone knows it. No one gasped. No one corrected her. No one said my name. The words just hung there, heavy and final, like they had been true all along. I remember staring at the floor, trying to understand how a sentence could feel like a door closing inside my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there feeling something shift. In that moment, I stopped seeing myself as her child. I started seeing myself as a problem. That sentence didn't just hurt. It changed the way I looked at every memory before it. And every version of myself after it. After that day, the word mistake followed me everywhere. It wasn't always said out loud, but it was always there. In the way my mother spoke to me. In the way she looked past me. In the way my name was used less and less. Sometimes it came out as a joke. She would laugh and say, "You know, you were unexpected." Or, "If things had gone differently, life would have been easier." Everyone laughed. I smiled too because that's what I was supposed to do. Other times it slipped out in small comments. When something went wrong, she'd sigh and say, "This is what happens." No explanation needed. I waited for someone to stop her. An aunt. An uncle. Anyone. No one did. They stayed quiet. They changed the subject. They looked away. And that silence said more than words ever could. It told me this wasn't just her opinion. It was something they had all accepted. At home, I wasn't just a child who made mistakes. I was the mistake. So I learned to take up less space. To speak less. To expect less. Because when no one corrects the label, eventually you start wearing it. At home, the rules were clear even if no one ever explained them. I was expected to understand without asking. To give without being thanked. To stay quiet without being noticed. If something needed to be done, it was mine to handle. If something went wrong, it was mine to carry. If I was tired, that didn't matter. Others were allowed to have bad days. Others were allowed to complain. Others were allowed to be comforted. I was told to be strong. To stop being sensitive. To not make things difficult. Love felt like something I had to earn. Good behavior bought temporary peace. Silence kept me safe. When I needed help, I was reminded of how much I already cost. When I asked for understanding, I was told to be grateful instead. No one said they loved me less. They didn't have to. It showed in the way my feelings were dismissed. In the way my struggles were minimized. In the way my presence felt optional. Living under the same roof didn't mean belonging. I wasn't treated like someone growing up. I was treated like someone who owed something just for being there. The moment I realized I didn't belong didn't come during a big fight. It came during a small one. I asked for something simple. Not attention. Not money. Just understanding. My mother looked at me like I had crossed a line. Like I was asking for more than I deserved. She said, "You always make things harder than they need to be." That's when it hit me. I wasn't family to her. I was a problem to manage. The room felt smaller after that. Not because anyone moved, but because I finally saw my place in it. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped hoping my words would matter. I went to my room and closed the door. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt empty. That emptiness told me the truth. I could stay and keep shrinking, or I could leave and be unknown. Either way, I was already alone. So I started planning quietly. Not out of anger. Not to punish anyone. Just to survive. Because staying no longer felt like living. Leaving didn't happen all at once. There was no big announcement. No packed suitcases by the door. No one asking where I was going. I left in pieces. First, I stopped sharing my thoughts. Then my plans. Then my feelings. By the time I was ready to go, I had already disappeared inside that house. The day I finally walked out, it was quiet. Too quiet. No one asked me to stay. No one followed me. No one said they would miss me. I remember standing at the door for a second longer than needed. Waiting for something, anything. It never came. When the door closed behind me, I felt fear rush in. But right behind it came relief. For the first time, my worth wasn't being measured. My presence wasn't being tolerated. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how I would manage. All I knew was this. I would rather struggle alone. then stay somewhere I was never wanted. Starting over was harder than I imagined. There was no safety net. No one to call when things went wrong. No familiar place to fall back on. I failed more times than I can count. Some days I barely made it through. Some nights I wondered if leaving was a mistake. But something was different this time. Every struggle was mine. Every small win belonged to me. No one reminded me of my past. No one reduced me to a label. I learned how to solve problems on my own. How to sit with fear without running from it. How to keep going even when no one was watching. Slowly, I met people who didn't know my family story. They didn't see me as a burden. They saw effort. They saw potential. That changed me. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove I deserved to exist. I was just living. I built routines. I built confidence. I built a sense of self that didn't depend on approval. And somewhere along the way, I realized something important. I had never been the mistake. After I left, the silence stretched on. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. No calls. No messages. No birthdays remembered. At first I kept waiting. I thought maybe someone would check in. Maybe someone would ask if I was okay. They didn't. That silence hurt, but it also taught me something. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. Stopped imagining apologies that never came. Stopped hoping for words they weren't ready to say. Distance gave me clarity. Without their voices around me, I could finally hear my own. I noticed how peaceful my days felt. How my chest didn't tighten when the phone rang. How I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I stopped measuring my life by what they thought of it. I stopped living in reaction to them. The space between us became a boundary, not a punishment. And in that quiet, I learned how to be okay without closure. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. Years later, I heard a knock at my door. It was unexpected. The kind of knock that makes your heart pause. I froze, unsure if I wanted to open it. When I did, I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. Familiar faces, but different. Smaller. Fragile. Their eyes were red. Their voices were trembling. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know why they were here. They began to speak. Not excuses. Not defenses. Just raw, trembling confessions. Regret. Sadness. Pain. For a moment, I remembered the years of silence. The words that had haunted me. The nights I spent wondering if I'd been too much. Or not enough. And yet here they were. Looking to me for something I never thought they would ask. Help, comfort, understanding. I saw the power had shifted. I was no longer the child carrying their judgment. I was the one who could stand steady. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I just felt calm. Because the door I had closed years ago had already changed who I was. And now they were standing on the other side. They spoke and the words tumbled out heavy and raw. Not apologies exactly, but admissions of mistakes. Regrets they hadn't known how to say before. Confessions of how they had hurt me knowingly or not. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct them. I just let them speak. Their tears reminded me of the pain I had carried for years. The years I spent questioning myself. The nights I cried alone wondering if I had been the problem. But hearing them now, I realized something important. The power had shifted. I wasn't looking for approval. I wasn't waiting for validation. I was simply seeing the truth laid bare. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about witnessing reality. They had come seeking comfort, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. And for the first time I could offer it or not without fear. I understood their sorrow. I acknowledged it. And yet I didn't let it erase my life. Because sometimes the past speaks. Not to punish, but to show how far you've come. And in that moment I felt steady, complete, free. I didn't slam the door. Not because I had forgiven them. Not because I wanted to forget the years of pain. I didn't slam it because I had already closed it long ago, inside myself. By the time they arrived, I was no longer the scared 17-year-old they had dismissed. I was someone who had built a life from scratch. Someone who had learned to survive without their approval, without their support, without their presence. When they spoke, their voices shaky and eyes wet, I felt something I hadn't expected. Calm. For the first time I realized that their return didn't define me. Their words, their tears, their regrets, they were theirs, not mine. And I was free to witness them without letting them pull me back into old wounds. I could have let anger take over. I could have listed every single way they had hurt me. I could have used their apologies, or lack thereof, to make them feel the same emptiness I had felt. But that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to prove a point. I didn't want to show them how strong I had become because of their mistakes. Instead, I chose boundaries. I chose clarity. I chose peace. I listened. I acknowledged their pain. I didn't judge. I didn't apologize for my own absence. I just stood there, steady, knowing that I was no longer the child they had labeled a mistake. I realized that true power doesn't come from making others see your worth. It comes from knowing your worth even when they don't. It comes from being able to face the people who hurt you without losing yourself in the process. It comes from understanding that healing is yours to give yourself, not something you wait for from others. When they finally left, I didn't feel emptiness. I didn't feel relief either. I felt something stronger, resolution. Years of pain, rejection, and silence didn't vanish overnight. But I finally understood that my life, my choices, and my happiness were mine alone. No one could take that from me. And for the first time I felt completely untouchable, not because I had power over them, but because I had power over myself. I want to speak directly to anyone listening who has ever been made to feel unwanted, unloved, or like they didn't belong. I need you to hear this. Leaving wasn't about cruelty. Leaving wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about survival. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you, nurture you, and love you the most fail. And in that failure, staying becomes more dangerous than walking away. I know what it feels like to carry a label that wasn't yours. A word like mistake can follow you for years, shaping how you see yourself. You start to believe it. You start to shrink to fit it. But here's the truth I learned. Family labels can be wrong. They don't define who you are. They don't define your worth. Walking away doesn't make you heartless. Walking away doesn't make you weak. Sometimes, it is the most powerful act of self-respect you can take. It is saying, I deserve more than this. I deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And when you do, you begin to rebuild your life on your own terms. You discover strength you didn't know you had. You discover that your voice matters. You discover that the world is bigger than the room where you were made to feel small. I want you to remember something important. Being called a mistake doesn't mean you are one. You are not broken. You are not unwanted. You are not less than anyone else. And as for me, after all the years of silence, rejection, and pain, I can finally say it with confidence. They called me a mistake, but mistakes don't build lives like this. This life, my life, is proof. Proof that leaving, surviving, and choosing yourself is not just necessary, it is transformative. Never let someone else's judgment define the life you deserve.